Her voice cut through the dim conference room like a blade. "Larissa, let's keep this quick." I didn't sit down. I didn't speak. I just watched the young CEO push a crisp folder across the table, a motion so casual it took my breath before the meaning caught up. For a moment, the room felt strangely hollow, as if someone had quietly opened a window and let all the air out. She kept talking, words softened by that corporate gentleness meant to hide cruelty. Restructuring, new direction, nothing personal. But every syllable landed with the weight of disbelief I hadn't yet allowed myself to feel. I had been here since before she graduated college. I had built the Alliance Sync engine, the backbone of 6 international companies, line by line. Failure by failure, dawn by dawn. And now, 14 hours before my 25-year service bonus, I was a checkbox, a footnote, a name to erase. Shock didn't come loud. It settled quietly, like frost across the spine. I heard myself ask nothing, protest nothing. I simply nodded, because disbelief has a way of freezing the mouth before it reaches the mind. She mistook it for agreement. Of course she did. People like her always confuse silence with surrender. I walked out before she finished rehearsing whatever kindness she thought she owed me. The hallway outside felt too bright, buzzing faintly under the late-night lights. I exhaled, slow and shallow, the way someone does when they're not sure the ground beneath them is finished shifting. That was when my phone vibrated. A single notification slid across the screen, one I had seen only twice in my career. Both times during major alliance breaches, primary integrator status modified. The words blurred for a second before they sharpened. That status wasn't supposed to change, not without a formal cross-alliance review. Not without international approval, not without me. I stood there, frozen again, but not from disbelief this time. Whatever they had done in that room wasn't just reckless. It had already woken the system. The building felt unnaturally quiet as I packed my belongings into a small cardboard box. The overhead lights hummed softly, but even that familiar sound seemed muted, as if the floor itself were holding its breath. I moved slowly. Not out of reluctance, but because every motion felt suspended in a strange, weightless calm. Stillness always came before a system failure. And tonight, that instinct whispered at the back of my mind. 20 years of building the Alliance Sync engine had trained me to recognize when something deeper was shifting. I was the trust anchor, the core validator, the person 6 international partners relied on to confirm the structural integrity of our network. Yet my company believed the role began and ended with a password. They never understood that trust was a human protocol, not a technical one. For a moment, I rested my hand on the desk, remembering how many nights I had spent rewriting modules no one else dared to touch. The hallway outside stretched empty, washed in the pale yellow glow of after-hours lighting. My footsteps echoed softly, each one sharpening the suspicion that something larger was unfolding behind the scenes. Systems reacted to instability faster than people ever could. And tonight, everything around me felt subtly and deliberately destabilized. I reached the elevator and pressed the button, watching the doors slide open with their usual mechanical precision. But precision in machines did not always mean predictability in people. The CEO had dismissed me as if I were an outdated component, easily replaced, easily forgotten. She would soon discover that the sync engine rarely allowed careless decisions to go unanswered. When I stepped outside, the cold night air met me with a clarity that felt almost surgical. Streetlights painted long silver lines across the pavement, guiding me toward my car. Halfway down the road, my phone buzzed with a notification from an unfamiliar international number. I glanced at the screen, expecting another automated alert from earlier that evening. Instead, a message from Coda Systems appeared, cheerful and unaware of what had transpired. Looking forward to tomorrow's final synchronization test at 5:15 a.m. It read, "Congratulations in advance on the successful activation of the $48 million contract." My grip tightened around the phone. though the stillness in my chest did not break. They did not know. No one outside the company knew. The night felt painfully aware of every misstep they had made. The partners believed I would be at my console before dawn, validating the network for the last and most critical test. Suspicion pulsed stronger now, threading through the calm like a hidden current. The sync engine had already sensed the leadership disruption they thought they could conceal, and the system never misread intent when trust was compromised. I drove the rest of the way home in measured silence, letting the message settle into the night with me. Beneath the calm, a quiet certainty began to surface with unmistakable clarity. By firing me, they had not only broken a promise, but disturbed the architecture holding 6 companies together. And tomorrow, at dawn, the network would reveal exactly what that disturbance meant. At 5:13 a.m., the world was quiet enough to hear the smallest deviations, quiet enough for systems to reveal what people tried to hide. I wasn't at my workstation the way I had been for 2 decades, watching the Alliance sync engine perform its pre-dawn diagnostic. Instead, I stood in my kitchen, the room still dark, a mug of untouched coffee cooling between my palms. The silence around me sharpened every instinct I had honed over 20 years. And somewhere inside that stillness, I felt the tremor of something going wrong. The sync engine's dawn cycle wasn't just routine, it was ritual. At exactly the same minute each morning, the network stretched itself awake, validating every connection across 6 companies, confirming the stability of the alliance. It was a living architecture, one that could sense imbalance before any human could name it. This morning, imbalance didn't whisper, it struck. By the time the digital clock on my stove blinked 5:13, the system had already detected the unauthorized change, the removal of the primary integrator. Me, the person the entire alliance recognized as the trust anchor. Within seconds, the system defaulted into its most unforgiving protocol. Every active pipeline froze. Every integration chain collapsed into a protective lock. Every partner across 3 continents received the same urgent, unambiguous alert: trust. Anchor removed, contract halted. Silent chaos, clean. Instantaneous. Absolute. There was no explosion, no siren, no visible collapse. Only a sudden absence of movement inside a system built on the promise of stability. When trust disappeared, everything else followed. I set the mug down, untouched. My heart didn't race, it simply tightened, the way it always did when I sensed a failure ripple across a network. But this wasn't a failure of code, it was a failure of judgment, theirs, not mine. The sync engine only behaved according to the rules we all agreed on. Remove the trust anchor without proper authorization, and the alliance defaulted to protection mode. There was no override, not without me. My phone vibrated once, then again. Then again, each notification sharp against the stillness. I expected messages from my former company, desperate calls, angry demands, confused engineers. But the first alert wasn't from them. It was from our primary customer, the party funding the $48 million contract. Urgent. System anomaly detected. Please confirm your availability. I stared at the message, not moving. Then another came in from Germany. Then one from Japan. Then Brazil. All the same question. All the same rising alarm. Why has the trust anchor been removed? My former company hadn't even noticed yet. But the clients, the people who depended on the network functioning at dawn, had felt the shockwave instantly. Systems never lied. Systems never delayed. Humans did both. Habitually, chaos traveled quietly through digital veins, far faster than panic could travel through boardrooms. Within minutes, the alliance partners began sending detailed snapshots of the lockout, the frozen pipelines, the halted timestamps, the automatic suspension of contract activation. I watched each one roll in as if reading the morning weather report. Though the stakes were far heavier than storms, my absence had triggered the truth: the company violated the trust protocol. The alliance didn't need my defense. The system itself was already speaking on my behalf. Another vibration. A call, this time international again. I didn't answer. Not yet. The sun began bleeding light into the edges of the sky, and the kitchen walls softened from blue to gray. Dawn used to mean readiness, a quiet confidence as the sync engine completed its cycle under my supervision. Now it revealed the consequences of a decision made by people who believed they could replace trust with convenience. The silent chaos kept expanding as more alerts arrived, each confirming what I already knew. They had tampered with the one component the Alliance could not function without. They thought removing me would change nothing. Instead, it changed everything at exactly 5:13 a.m. The first sign of trouble arrived before the sun fully cleared the skyline. I wasn't there to see it myself, but I had spent enough years in that building to picture the scene with perfect clarity, the CEO striding through the glass entrance with her usual self-assured confidence. A latte in one hand, her phone in the other, already drafting messages she expected the world to obey. She had fired me the night before as if she were deleting an outdated file clean. Simple. Efficient. She believed the sync engine would operate just fine without the woman who built it. But corporate fear never announces itself loudly at first. It starts as an inconvenience, an unexpected ripple against the smooth surface of control. Her first ripple came in the form of a call from Germany, then Japan, then India. The calls stacked so quickly, her voicemail collapsed into a blinking red warning. By the time she reached her office, her assistant was already pale, holding out her phone like something volatile. Another call. Ma'am, they say it's urgent. They were all urgent. Every partner in the Alliance wanted the same answer. Why has the trust anchor been removed without authorization? I could imagine her frown sharpening as she insisted this had to be a misunderstanding. She'd probably demanded that someone from engineering get on the line immediately. She never liked being challenged, least of all by people she considered outside her domain. But the Alliance sync engine didn't care about her domain. It only cared about compliance, and compliance had been broken the second she signed my termination papers. She had removed the primary integrator without legal notice, without protocol, without informing the international partners who legally depended on my validation. That realization hadn't reached her yet, but it was about to, down the hall. The legal department was gathering like a storm. They had seen the alert before she had a red banner across the Alliance dashboard showing the entire pipeline locked when she stepped into their conference room demanding answers. They had only one. According to the treaty, any change in the status of the trust anchor must be reported 90 days in advance. You signed a removal with zero notice. The room must have gone silent then, the kind of silence that stretches thin under the weight of consequences. She would insist she fired an internal employee. Nothing more. But the lawyers shook their heads. Ma'am, Larissa was never categorized as internal. That statement alone would have cracked the ground beneath her. She had never bothered to read the integration treaties or the personnel classifications that tied us to 6 separate corporations. She assumed my badge defined my role. She assumed wrong. My role, trusted external integrator, was protected under the Alliance. Not just protected, required. And then came the twist she could not outrun. Her inbox chimed with an automated protocol update generated at dawn. Larissa Boyd, trusted external integrator. Status removed. Compliance violation triggered. The color drained from her face. Legal confirmed it. The system had flagged the termination as a breach of contract. A breach that put the $48 million deal at immediate risk. Phones kept ringing. Voices kept demanding explanations she didn't have. Every unanswered question sharpened the fear inside that room. She had thought firing me would streamline operations. Instead, she had dismantled the legal foundation of the entire Alliance. Corporate fear had finally arrived, not as panic or shouting, but as something far colder, the realization that she had pulled a single thread. And the entire international network was now unraveling in her hands. The boardroom had always felt too cold, too polished, too carefully arranged to show anything as human as fear. But that morning, according to the people who later described it to me, The room carried a different temperature entirely. It was thick with tension, the kind that tightens the air before anyone speaks, the kind that forces accountability to surface whether people want it to or not. I wasn't there. Of course, but after 25 years inside that company, I could picture every detail: the long mahogany table, the city skyline beyond the glass, the neat rows of bottled water no one ever opened, and in the middle of it all, the CEO, standing alone at the front, pretending she still held control while the ground crumbled under her feet. The emergency meeting had been called at first light, triggered by a cascade of international complaints pouring in from every partner in the alliance. Germany demanded an explanation. Japan requested immediate clarification. Brazil threatened contractual penalties. India wanted a full accountability report. 6 countries, hundreds of executives. One unifying question: why was the trust anchor removed without authorization? The board members arrived angry, not the dramatic, shouting kind of anger, but the quiet, slicing kind that comes from betrayal and incompetence colliding. They had all reviewed the overnight lockout. They had all seen the alliance dashboard frozen in red. And worst of all, they had all seen the automated compliance flag naming my role as legally protected. The CEO tried to begin with a justification, something about restructuring and internal alignment, but the chairman cut her off before the second sentence. You removed the only person the alliance fully trusted. He said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. From there, the tension in the room grew heavier with each minute. They pressed her for a recovery plan. They demanded access instructions. They asked who could restore the system. She couldn't answer any of it, because no one, not the CTO, not engineering, not operations, knew how to reach the deeper authentication layer of the sync engine. I had built that layer myself, brick by brick, using protocols formed through 16 years of cross-alliance negotiation. It wasn't arrogance that made me the only one who understood it. It was trust earned slowly, internationally, painfully, and when they fired me, they severed it. The CTO attempted to explain that the system should respond to internal administrative overrides, but the alliance compliance officer shook his head immediately. It won't, he said. Not with an unauthorized trust anchor change. The system is behaving exactly as designed. Exactly as designed. The words landed in that cold room with a weight I had always known they carried. Then came the twist that tightened the noose around the CEO's authority. One of the international partners, Coda Systems from Japan, sent a forwarded email to the board. Marked 6 months old. It was one of mine. A detailed warning outlining the precise risk of removing key personnel without alliance-approved notice. A risk I had identified, documented, and escalated through the proper channels. The email had never been answered, never acknowledged, because the CEO had manually removed it from the priority queue. The board members read in silence as the evidence displayed on the main screen a timestamp. My name, my warning, the CEO's refusal to respond, and her digital signature marking the thread as deprioritized. Accountability arrived like a slow, inevitable storm. The chairman folded his hands. You were aware of the risk. Yes. But. And you concealed it. That is not. And you acted unilaterally in a matter requiring international approval. Every word carved deeper into the truth she had tried to bury. By the end of the hour, the board had ordered her to step out of the room so they could deliberate privately. She resisted at first, claiming she needed to stay to help mitigate escalation. But the CFO simply said, You've escalated everything already. She left the room trembling. The board stayed behind in silence, reviewing the damage she had caused. And though I wasn't there to witness it, I could feel the shift from miles away, the unmistakable turning of a wheel long overdue. Tension had done its work. Accountability had finally arrived. The message arrived just as the sun broke across my living room floor, sharp, direct, and carrying the weight of consequences no one at the company had expected to face. I was standing beside the window, the morning still cool, when my phone vibrated with an international alert flagged urgent. I opened it slowly, not out of hesitation, but because something inside me already knew what it would say. If Larissa Boyd does not revalidate the alliance structure within 12 hours, the contract will be permanently canceled. 12 hours, $48 million, 6 international partners, and one decision they could not undo. I reread the message once, then set my phone face down on the table. The anger that rose in me didn't flare or burn. It settled quiet, steady, dignified, a kind of anger that belonged not to outrage, but to clarity. For years I had protected them from exactly this outcome. For years I had built a network that depended on trust, transparency, and technical discipline. But the people in charge had treated that trust like a disposable asset. Now the system and the alliance was simply enforcing the consequences they refused to acknowledge. Within minutes, the company began calling. First the front desk, then HR, then the CTO, then the CEO's assistant. Each call went to voicemail. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted silence, real silence to think, to breathe, to choose. Instead of reacting like the loyal engineer they had always expected me to be. By the 6th missed call, I powered the phone off entirely. I stepped outside onto the porch, letting the cold air temper the tightness gathering behind my ribs. It wasn't anger at being needed. They had needed me for decades. It wasn't even anger at being fired. It was the hypocrisy of it dismissed as obsolete at night, begged for survival at dawn. I sat there long enough for the quiet to feel steady again. Then a knock sounded at my door. Not forceful, not frantic, just hesitant. When I opened it, I found Michael, the youngest engineer in the integration team, standing with his hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets. He looked like someone who hadn't slept. Someone who had carried guilt from the office directly to my porch. "Larissa, I'm sorry," he said before I could speak. "They told me not to contact you." It took a moment for his words to settle. "Who told you?" he swallowed. "The CEO, before the meeting yesterday. She said if I spoke up during your termination, or reached out to you afterward, she'd have my credentials suspended." A long, cold breath escaped me, not a sigh, but something heavier. So that was how far she'd gone to make sure no one interrupted her performance of authority. She hadn't just fired me, she had silenced anyone who might defend me. Michael shifted nervously. "But the partners, they're furious. They sent a formal ultimatum. They said if you're not the one who validates the system, they'll dissolve the contract. They asked me to find you because, well, you won't answer their calls." "I know," I said quietly. He looked down, embarrassed. "They're panicking. Everyone's panicking." "I'm not," I replied. And I wasn't. Because dignified anger doesn't make you shake, it makes you still. It sharpens the lines between what is acceptable and what is not. It reminds you that survival is not always about saving the thing that betrayed you, but about choosing what deserves your effort next. Michael hesitated. "They need you. Larissa." I met his eyes. "Needing me now is not the same as valuing me then." He nodded slowly, shame darkening his face. As he left, I closed the door with a calm finality, the 12-hour countdown ticking somewhere inside the world I had built but no longer belonged to, for the first time in years. I let the company face the consequences without shielding them. My anger wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The riverbank was quiet enough that I could finally hear myself think. I walked slowly along the narrow path, letting the cold morning air settle into my lungs with each controlled breath. The water beside me moved in long, steady lines, nothing rushed, nothing forced, and for the first time since the company had dismissed me, I felt something close to stillness. Not peace, but stillness. The kind that comes after too many years of running on instinct, urgency, and obligation. My steps softened as I replayed the pieces of a career that had shaped more of my life than I ever admitted out loud. I remembered the night the internal security breach nearly collapsed the network. Everyone panicked, but I stayed through 30 straight hours, 2 pots of coffee, 1 migraine, and no sleep-patching vulnerabilities until the threat was gone. No one wrote my name in the incident report. The CEO at the time simply said, "Good job, team," and dismissed us. I remembered the year we faced consecutive cyber attacks during a global summit. The sync engine was still young then, delicate in its architecture, and failure at that moment would have cost the company its reputation. I worked through the night on a conference call with teams across 4 time zones, my voice so hoarse by dawn that I could barely speak, but the system held because I held it. And I remembered every board meeting where executives praised the system's reliability without ever acknowledging the person who built it, nurtured it, protected it. They celebrated outcomes, not the labor beneath them. I accepted it because the work mattered more to me than the applause. But acceptance isn't the same as being blind. Quiet pain curled at the edges of those memories, not sharp, not loud, but steady, the kind that comes from giving too much to people who assumed your loyalty was infinite. I paused at the railing overlooking the widest stretch of water, staring at the slow ripple of sunlight across the surface. I wasn't avoiding the company's calls because I wanted revenge. I was avoiding them because I couldn't pretend their treatment of me hadn't cut deeper than I expected. They hadn't just fired me, they had discarded me. And there is a difference. If I went back now, it wouldn't be for a paycheck or a bonus. It wouldn't even be for the $48 million contract at risk. It would mean accepting that the years of dismissal, belittlement, and erasure were simply part of doing business, and I refused to teach myself that lesson. After several miles, I finally sat on a bench, letting the stiffness in my legs settle into something bearable. The river moved with unwavering consistency, something I had always admired. Systems were like that, too, predictable when built with integrity, unforgiving when mishandled. Curiosity eventually pulled me back to my phone. I turned it on, expecting missed calls. Maybe an email from legal, maybe a desperate message from the CTO. Instead, a flood of notifications filled the screen, nearly 40 messages, each from international partners, each time-stamped from the hours I had been walking. I opened the first one, then another, then another. One sentence repeated across nearly every message. "You are the reason we signed, not your system, not your department, not your company, you." Quiet pain shifted into something else, something steadier, heavier, strangely grounding. For 20 years they had told me I was replaceable. Yet here were 6 nations telling me I was not only valued but central. As the river continued its slow, deliberate pulse, I realized something I had forgotten in the noise of loyalty and habit. I wasn't the engineer they fired. I was the engineer they never understood. And understanding that hurt, but it also clarified exactly what my next decision needed to be. The call came just as I set my keys on the kitchen counter. The familiar clink landing in a house still wrapped in the hush of an early afternoon. I wasn't expecting anyone, not after ignoring every attempt the company had made to reach me for the last several hours. But the tone of the ringing phone was different this time, international, direct, and when I glanced at the caller ID, the name froze me in place. Schneider Cult Systems, Germany. In 25 years of partnership, they had never contacted me at home, not once. All communication had always gone through formal channels, scheduled calls, encrypted portals, structured protocol, never a direct line, never something this personal. I let the phone ring twice before answering, not out of hesitation, but because silence, used wisely, has its own kind of power. "Ms. Boyd," a voice said the moment the line connected. Calm, precise, unmistakably German. "Thank you for taking this call. We were informed of internal disruptions at your company. We need to confirm whether you are still able to validate the alliance structure." I didn't respond immediately. The quiet stretched between us. Not empty, but deliberate. They filled it first. "We are asking you," the voice continued, "not for your company's sake, but for ours. The stability of the entire alliance depends on your validation." I exhaled softly, letting their words settle. So even they knew. even across oceans and time zones. They understood what the executives in my own building never did, that systems do not anchor themselves. People anchor them. Your company fired me, I said finally. My voice was steady, not emotional, simply factual. We are aware, the man replied. It was a grave miscalculation. Again. I didn't answer. And again. The silence drew out something deeper, an urgency they couldn't hide. We would like you to perform the validation regardless, he said. The contract cannot move forward otherwise. Our networks remain locked. I could almost picture their operations command center screens frozen in red alerts. Engineers pacing, executives frowning at compliance logs they couldn't interpret. Normally, I would have stepped in without hesitation, guided them, reassured them, stabilized what needed stabilizing. But this time the calm inside me held firm. And if I decline, I asked quietly. There was a pause on their end, brief but telling. Then the alliance dissolves, he said, and the $48 million integration contract dissolves with it. Power in silence. They knew I wasn't rushing to rescue anyone, not after what had been done. And they respected that pause. But what came next was something I had never heard from any partner. Not in a quarter century of collaboration. In the event your company fails to treat you with the professionalism and respect your role warrants, he said, we are prepared to offer you an independent contract directly with us. You would serve as our lead integrator, separate from your former employer. The alliance would support this transition. My hand tightened around the phone, not from shock, but from a quiet, rising steadiness, a confirmation of something I had privately suspected, but never expected to hear spoken aloud. The trust that held the alliance together wasn't institutional, it was personal. And if I accept your offer, I asked, then the alliance continues, he said, under your authority. For a long moment, I didn't speak. The house around me stayed still. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to fade into the background. Silence had always been my way of thinking through problems, but now it felt different. Now it felt like the ground on which the entire conversation rested. When I finally answered, my voice was quieter than before, but it carried far more weight. I hear your request, I said, and your offer. We will follow your decision, he replied, not the company's. After we ended the call, I stood in the middle of my kitchen, surrounded by stillness that no longer felt empty. For the first time since being fired, I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt. What I felt instead was something deeper, something the company had failed to give me. But the alliance had understood instinctively recognition. They hadn't begged. They hadn't pleaded. They had offered partnership. And in that moment, in the quiet of my own home, I realized the shift that had finally happened. I wasn't the discarded engineer anymore. I was the axis they needed, the stability they trusted, the silence they listened to. The lobby doors slid open with a muted hiss, and for a brief moment, the entire building seemed to inhale. I stepped across the threshold, not as an employee returning to her post, but as someone summoned, requested by the only authority that still held weight inside these walls, the board. There was no badge clipped to my coat this time, no laptop bag slung over my shoulder, and yet every pair of eyes that lifted from their screens followed me with a mixture of surprise, caution, and something else I hadn't seen in years. Respect. My footsteps echoed down the marble floor, steady and unhurried. I wasn't here to reclaim anything. I wasn't here to plead or negotiate. I was here because an entire international alliance was frozen in place, and the board had finally realized the truth. The system had never trusted the company, it had trusted me. As I passed the central operations cluster, whispers flickered like static behind me. Engineers nudged one another. Analysts straightened in their chairs. A few nodded subtly, almost gratefully, as if my presence alone restored an order the company had disrupted. I acknowledged none of it. Authority doesn't need acknowledgement, it simply exists. Then I saw her. The CEO stood outside the boardroom, mid-sentence with the CFO, her face draining of color the moment she recognized me. Her expression didn't hold anger or outrage, it held fear. Not the frantic kind, but the quiet, sobering kind that settles in when someone realizes they are no longer the most powerful person in the room. Larissa, she breathed, as if saying my name might somehow reset the last 48 hours. I offered a small, polite nod. Good morning. Nothing more. No accusation. No emotion she could weaponize. Controlled confrontation is never loud. It unfolds in composure, in the realization that the person standing before you no longer shares the limitations you imposed on them. The boardroom doors opened before she could speak again. A senior member gestured me inside with urgency. We need you at the console, he said. Immediately. I entered the command hub adjacent to the meeting room, a place I once knew better than my own kitchen. Screens flickered with frozen alliance pipelines, red error banners, and every symptom of the system's protective lockdown. The engineers stepped aside without being asked. I didn't need permission. I approached the primary terminal and rested my fingers lightly on the keyboard. The CEO lingered behind me, arms folded tight, trying and failing to mask the panic that clung to her like static. The board watched in tense silence. I typed my credentials slowly, deliberately, the way you assert control without raising your voice. The screen paused for a heartbeat, then another, and then a message bloomed across the display. Bright white against midnight blue, fallback trust anchor, engaged welcome back. Larissa, no one spoke, no one breathed. The system had recognized me before the people in the room had fully accepted what that meant. It didn't matter that the CEO had erased my access. It didn't matter that HR had processed termination paperwork. The deeper alliance protocols didn't answer to corporate bureaucracy. They answered to history, to trust earned through years of crisis, accuracy, and leadership that could not be fabricated. Behind me, someone whispered. It reactivated itself. Not itself. Me. The CEO stepped forward, her voice cracking. Can you fix it? I turned slightly, meeting her eyes with the same calm that had steadied me for decades. I can restore the network, I said. But fixing the cause of the failure? That's not within my authority. Her jaw tightened. She understood. Everyone in the room did. Authority isn't reclaimed by shouting or demanding. It returns in the silence that follows truth. And in that silence, the entire company finally understood who they had thrown away and who they had been forced to call back. The moment my fingers settled on the keyboard, the room fell into a tense, reverent silence. I didn't need anyone to explain what had to be done. The international alliance protocols, those deeper, older layers of the sync engine, were mine alone to navigate. They weren't included in onboarding binders. They weren't stored in internal wikis. They lived in the architecture I had built year after year. Refinement after refinement. Crisis after crisis. So while the executives hovered behind me with anxious breath, I centered myself in the familiarity of work that had always outlasted titles, positions, and politics. Technical triumph doesn't come wrapped in applause. It comes in the steady return to something only you can command. I began by initiating the revalidation cascade, a sequence the CEO had never heard of. One the engineers had only seen referenced in passing logs without understanding its purpose. 90 minutes, that was what the alliance demanded to rebuild trust after an unauthorized personnel change. The system responded immediately, opening encrypted interfaces that displayed one verification checkpoint after another. With each confirmation, a new window appeared labeled with the name of an international partner: Germany, Japan, India, Brazil. Each partner's token surfaced like an old scar, evidence of every moment the company had taken my work for granted. Yet each token also affirmed something deeper. I had earned this access. I had earned this reliance. The pipeline indicators remained an angry red during the first phase. Red meant locked. Red meant failure. Red meant consequences none of the executives behind me were prepared to confront. as I worked. I heard the CEO pacing near the back of the room, her shoes tapping in an unsteady rhythm. She asked questions no one answered. How long will this take? Is it recovering? Can't someone else assist? But her voice gradually softened as she realized the truth in real time. There was no shortcut. There was no alternative. There was only the protocol I had written and the woman who understood it. When the revalidation reached the midway point, the first shift occurred. The pipeline changed from red to a deep amber, cautious, conditional, not yet forgiving. Engineers watching the monitors released small breaths they didn't realize they were holding. Amber meant the system was listening again. Amber meant the alliance recognized I was back. Amber meant the structure was rebuilding itself exactly as designed. I continued through the remaining authorizations with the quiet precision that had once defined my entire career. Technical triumph is rarely loud. It moves like a pulse steadying after shock. At the 70-minute mark, the final international checkpoint illuminated. This one always carried the most weight, the cross-alliance trust evaluation. It appeared slower than the others, as if assessing not just the code, but the intent behind its disruption. When it finally accepted my credentials, the shift was immediate and absolute. The pipeline bars transitioned from amber to a clean, vibrant green. Green meant readiness. Green meant activation. Green meant the $48 million contract was alive again. A collective exhale filled the room. Though I remained focused on the last command, unlocking the network in full compliance mode, I executed the release protocol with a final keystroke. The system flashed once, twice, then generated a document I had almost forgotten existed: a fully automated audit trail. This wasn't a simple log. It was a chronological reconstruction of every unauthorized change, every override attempt, every breach of alliance procedure. It unfolded across the main screen with the clarity of sunlight, time-stamped, unalterable, devastating. And there, embedded among the entries, was the line that froze the CEO in place: termination order issued Boyd. Larissa. Action non-compliant. No one spoke. No one breathed. The system had not only restored itself, it had told the full truth without hesitation or bias. The CEO stepped backward as if the screen had physically struck her. Her face drained of color. The board members exchanged looks heavy with realization. Technical triumph wasn't the pipeline turning green. It was this, watching the architecture I had built defend itself and defend me with unwavering accuracy. I finally rose from the chair, letting the silence settle into its rightful authority. The system had done what people failed to do. It had remembered who I was. The sun was beginning its slow descent when the board called the second emergency session of the day. By then, the building had gone strangely quiet, as if every department, every office, every passing conversation had emptied itself of noise in anticipation of what came next. I waited alone in a smaller conference room across the corridor, not because they told me to wait there, but because justice feels truer when observed from a distance. It does not need applause or spectacle. It simply finds its way to where it belongs. The way light inevitably finds the horizon, through the frosted glass. I could hear their voices rise and fall in sharp, clipped tones. The board members were reviewing everything the system had revealed: the unauthorized overrides, the deleted warnings, the personnel manipulations. The silence forced upon anyone who might have defended me. Most damning of all was the audit trail entry marked termination order issued Boyd. Larissa non-compliant, a single line that carried the full weight of their recklessness. When the door finally opened, the chairman stepped out first. He looked older than he had that morning, as if the truth had carved new lines into his face. "Miss Boyd," he said, "the board has cast its vote." His tone was neither triumphant nor apologetic. It was solemn, grounded, as if the decision itself carried a gravity no one in leadership could ignore anymore. Effective immediately. He continued, "The CEO is suspended pending a full investigation." A quiet finality settled into the room. I felt no triumph. No triumphant surge of victory, just the stillness that comes when the world finally stops spinning in the wrong direction. Accountability had arrived. Not violently, but precisely. Unmistakably. And without room for misinterpretation. We will issue a formal apology to all international partners. The chairman went on. The violation of trust protocol was unacceptable. You prevented the complete collapse of the alliance and the contract. I nodded once. The system did what it was designed to do, I said. It protected the trust built into it, behind him. Several directors exchanged brief, uneasy glances, expressions belonging to people who suddenly realized how much they had overlooked, how much they had benefited from without ever understanding its foundations, how much they had endangered without meaning to. Then came the part they had rehearsed, the part they assumed would resolve everything. We would like you to return to your position, the chairman said. Not just as senior engineer. We will reinstate you with an elevated title, Chief Integration Architect, doubling your salary, expanded authority over the alliance, and a special compensation package in recognition of the crisis you averted. The offer was generous. It was sincere. It was everything they believed I would want. But generosity is not the same as justice, and sincerity is not the same as understanding. I let a long breath settle in my chest before I spoke. I appreciate the offer, I said, but I won't be returning. The room shifted. A director leaned forward. Startled. Ms. Boyd, you're essential to the alliance. We need you. You needed me before. I replied softly. But you didn't value me then. My voice wasn't sharp. It wasn't emotional. It was steady. The way truth becomes when carried for a long time. The chairman lowered his gaze in acknowledgement. He didn't argue. He didn't plead. He simply absorbed the weight of what he and the company had allowed to happen. Then, he said after a moment, what would it take? What do you ask in return for everything you've done? What I wanted was not revenge, nor did I want a title, or money, or power. Those things were temporary. They would rot at the edges the moment leadership changed again. What I wanted was something quieter, deeper, a correction to something broken long before I was fired. I want the CEO, I said, to sign a formal statement acknowledging the technical expertise, dedication, and irreplaceable value of senior engineers within this company. Not just me, all of them. Every person dismissed as outdated or invisible. A slow silence filled the room. Not resistance realization, one board member whispered, almost to himself. That's simple? No, I replied. It's necessary. It wasn't about clearing my name. It was about clearing the path for those who came after me, those who had carried the company for decades, only to be treated as relics. If this building was going to survive, it needed to understand the foundation it had forgotten. The chairman nodded. We will draft the document immediately. I didn't wait. I stepped to the window while they worked, watching the last streaks of sunlight fade across the city. There was no swelling of pride, no bitterness, no resentment left. Only a quiet final clarity. Justice had never been about punishing them. It had been about restoring what mattered. When the chairman returned, he handed me the signed statement. The CEO's signature trembled slightly at the bottom. I didn't need to read it. Its existence alone was enough. I thanked them, gathered my coat, and walked toward the elevator. No applause, no triumphant music. Just justice, quiet and final, carrying me out of the building I once held together. And into the next chapter I would build on my own terms. The morning after the board delivered its final decision, I woke to a kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not the heavy quiet of exhaustion, not the brittle quiet that follows betrayal, but a gentle stillness like the world had finally stopped pushing against me. The sunrise pulled soft streaks of gold through my curtains, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe without bracing for whatever crisis waited on the other side of my front door. I made coffee slowly, without rushing to check emails or system alerts. My hands moved out of habit, but there was no urgency anymore. No sense of being tethered to an organization that believed I was replaceable until they discovered what I truly held together. I stepped outside onto the porch, feeling the morning air brush against my face, and I realized something both simple and profound. I was free. Not dismissed. Not discarded free. By mid-morning, my inbox was already filling with messages from the alliance partners. Some were formal, others warm, but all carried the same sentiment: gratitude, respect, and an invitation. They didn't want me back as an employee of the company that had abandoned me. They wanted me as something far more valuable, an independent consultant with full authority to advise, audit, and stabilize their integration systems. My name, not the corporation's, was now the anchor. At 62, I wasn't being tolerated, I was being chosen. I spent the next several days drafting new contracts, this time on my terms, my schedule, my boundaries, my worth. I met with representatives from Germany, Japan, India, Brazil, and 2 additional partners who had heard about the crisis and wanted my oversight before something similar happened to them. No one asked whether I was too old to keep up with evolving technology. No one dismissed my experience as outdated. They didn't see age, they saw legacy. I worked from my living room, then from a cafe overlooking the river, then from a quiet co-working studio with warm wooden tables and sunlit windows. Everywhere I went, I carried the sense that my career hadn't ended when they fired me. It had finally begun to belong to me. Rebirth isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's a return to yourself. Sometimes it's the reclamation of work you once gave away too freely. One evening, after signing the final contract with a new partner in Singapore, I closed my laptop and felt a subtle shift inside me, not triumph, not relief, but continuity. A sense that what I had built over decades was no longer trapped inside a single company's walls. It was out in the world now, standing on its own structure, speaking for itself. Legacy is not what people say when you're gone. Legacy is what continues because you lived. The next morning, just as the sun crested the edge of the horizon, my phone lit up with a soft vibration on the bedside table. I reached for it, expecting another message from an engineering team or a scheduling request from one of the partners. But the notification on the screen wasn't from any of them. It was from the Alliance Sync engine itself, an alert I had never seen before. Primary integrator status, permanent trust. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling the warmth of the dawn settle across my chest. The system had evolved beyond the architecture I embedded into it. It had grown, adapted, learned. Yet in that evolution, it still recognized the person who had guided it through every failure, every redesign, every long night spent stabilizing what others thought was unshakable. Permanent trust, not active, not temporary, not restored, permanent. A designation no corporation could override. A status no executive could revoke. A recognition written into the very logic of the alliance. I set the phone down with a quiet smile. Legacy wasn't just something the world gives you. It's something you earn. Piece by piece, through every unseen effort, every act of resilience, every moment you choose integrity when no one is watching. And now, I want to ask you which moment in my story stayed with you the most. The dawn lockdown, the board's vote, the audit trail revealing everything. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And before you go, let me know where you're listening from today. Hearing from all of you around the world is one of my favorite parts of sharing these stories. If this journey resonated with you, if you felt a spark of recognition, strength, or quiet pride, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing so you don't miss the next story. It helps the channel grow, and it lets me keep bringing you the kinds of narratives that remind us what dignity, experience, and courage truly look like. Thank you for being here. Let's keep building stories and legacies that outlast every